Hi everyone, welcome to another knitting tutorial with me, Laura, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to do the daisy stitch. And this is a beautiful soft fabric that really only uses knit stitches and purl stitches. It's not as complicated as it may look, so hopefully you'll give it a go and learn something new. So for this stitch design we work to units of 4 plus 1. So I'm just going to cast on some stitches. I'm going to start off with a slip knot. Now if you're brand new to knitting, then I do recommend checking out my beginner tutorials such as how to cast on and how to do the knit stitch and the purl stitch. But I'm actually going to work a long tail cast on to begin with. It's going to count as my first stitch, and then I'm going to cast on units of 4 to begin with, then plus 1. So let's do a 4 times table to begin with. So that's 1, 2, 3, another stitch 4. So I've cast on a unit of 4, so I've got 16 here. And once you've got your unit of 4, then we're just going to do an extra cast on after that. So I'm going to do one more cast on stitch after that. So in total I have a stitch count of 17, and then all we're going to do is we're just going to do a row of knit stitches. So we're going to move the needle to our other hand and we're just going to do a row of knit stitches. So we're just going to do the normal knit stitch, and if this is too fast for you, then like I said, check out my beginner stitch tutorials for the knit stitch and the purl stitch and casting on. But we're just going to do our first row of knit stitches. So we're going to knit all of these stitches to begin. So just knit every stitch all the way across. Nice normal knit stitches. Okay, so just coming up to the last stitch, and we're just going to knit the last stitch as well. So we've just done a row of normal knit stitches like so, and then we're going to move the needle over, and this is when we're going to start our pattern. Okay, so the very first row of our pattern is we are going to start the first stitch with a knit stitch. So we're just going to knit the first stitch as normal, so just do a knit stitch, and then we need to purl 3 stitches together, so a P3 together. So we're going to bring the yarn forward as if doing a purl stitch, and we need to put our needle into 3 of these stitches. Can be a little bit tricky. And so when you've got your needle into 3 of those stitches, we're then just going to do a purl stitch to begin. So bring the yarn round as if doing a purl stitch and then grabbing the yarn, but instead of pushing these 3 off, we're going to leave them on there, because what we're going to do now is a YON, which means yarn over needle, if you ever see that in a pattern. So because we're in a purl position here, what that means is we're just going to, the yarn's still at the front, we're going to wrap it around this right hand needle as if coming around to bring the yarn back round to the front again, like that. So we just wrap the yarn around the right hand needle and bring it down through the middle, and then we're going to purl the 3 same stitches again. So they're still on our left hand needle. So all we're going to do is we're going to put our needle into those 3 loops again, and then we're just going to purl them together again, so the yarn's still at the front, and just do a purl stitch as normal. So it's the same thing again. Then we finally pop off those 3 stitches like so. Okay, and that's what we've done there. We've sort of joined stitches together and created stitches, so we end up with the same stitch count. We've got 4 loops there. Then we're going to do a knit stitch in between, so we move the yarn to the back, then just do a knit stitch as normal. Nice normal knit stitch, and then we're going to do the same thing we did here. So bring the yarn forward again, and we're going to purl 3 stitches together. So we're going to put our needle into 3 of these stitches, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we've got our needle into 3 of those stitches, and it's a little bit difficult for me because these are children's needles, so they're not particularly sharp. They're great because they're small, but they're not particularly sharp. So for this pattern you might actually look for some needles that are a little bit more grown up and have a sharper point. But what we're going to do then is we are going to purl these 3 together. So we wrap the yarn around as if doing a purl and then bring that through, but instead of bringing those off, we're going to leave them on there and we're going to do a yarn over needle. So all that means is, because we're doing a purl stitch. I'm going to wrap the yarn around our right hand needle and then bringing it down through the middle again. So that's just created an extra stitch on this needle that we're losing, and then we're going to purl these 3 together again. So we just put the needle through those three stitches again, and then just purl them again. So wrap the yarn around and do a normal purl stitch, and then finally we take those 3 stitches off. So we've reduced by 3, but we've added the 2 that we've lost. Then we do another knit stitch again. So we bring the yarn to the back and just do a normal knit stitch. And we're going to repeat that all the way across. So bring the yarn forward, purl 3 together. So 1, 2 and 3. Purl those 3 together. But careful not to push those off. I'm going to leave them on there. Wrap the yarn around our hook, bring it down the middle. Then put our needle into those 3 stitches again, and we're going to purl them together again. And then finally bring them off. Then knit a stitch. Then do another purl 3 together. So bring the yarn to the front. Put your needle into the next 3 stitches, which hopefully you'll find a little bit easier than me. Then we're going to wrap the yarn, do a purl as normal, but don't push those off. Instead, we're going to wrap the yarn around our needle, a Y over N, Y-O-N. Then we're going to purl these 3 together again. So we put the needle through those again, and then do a purl 3 together again. Then finally drop those off. Just have 1 stitch left. We're just going to knit the last stitch. Sort my tail end out. I'm going to knit the last stitch. Okay, so it doesn't look like much at the moment, but if we turn it over, we can start to see some interesting patterns starting to come into effect here. Now we're just going to do a knit row, a nice plain knit row, and this is a really good way of knitting up your stitches again. So we're going to knit every stitch. We need to make sure we knit the right stitches in the right order. So we're going to knit every stitch. That tail end yarn keeps tricking me, so we're going to knit each stitch. But just be careful, and I tend to use my nail just to divide out these stitches to find out which one is the next one. Because we've added stitches, sometimes they can get a little bit confused like this. So just make sure they're in the right order, just move them around. They should separate into proper stitches in order. And then we're going to knit them. So you just want to make sure you don't knit the wrong stitches. And then just keep knitting the stitches to the end. Again, just making sure just to bring those out so we know which one to do next. And just continue knitting all the way across for this row. So this will be row 3. So we started with a knit row, and then we did a pattern row. Now we're just doing a knit row again. So every time we do a pattern row, we're going to do a knit row in between. But the pattern row changes on the next one. So it's coming up to the end. Again, just dividing out those stitches. Maybe don't use a stringy yarn like me. It's been used very often, this yarn. I tend to be frogging quite a lot of yarn lately. Okay, so we've knitted that row. You can start to see the little daisy stitches coming together. So now we're going to move on to the next pattern row. So this time we're going to alternate our little daisy stitches, and we're still going to start off with a knit stitch, but we're going to do a knit one, purl one, knit one. So we're going to start off with a knit stitch. So we always start off with a knit stitch. Then we're going to purl one, so bring the yarn forward and just do 1 purl stitch, just a normal purl stitch. And then we go back to doing our knit, then our purl 3 together. So we're going to do a knit stitch. Then it's back to our pattern, so bring the yarn through and we're going to purl the next 3 together. So go into the next 3 stitches, 1, 2, and 3, a little bit easier once you get going. Then going to purl these 3 together, but we're going to leave them on our needle. Do a yarn over needle, so we're going to wrap it around this right hand needle and bring it down the middle. Then we're going to purl these 3 together again, so we go into those 3 stitches again and do a purl stitch. Then finally drop those off. Then we go back to just doing 1 knit stitch, and then it falls into the same pattern as our other pattern rows. So bring the yarn forward, purl 3 together, and 3. So we purl those 3 together, then we do a yarn over needle, so I'm going to wrap it around the needle and then purl those 3 together again. It's just the same thing. I'm going to repeat that pattern all the way across, so we do a knit 1, then purl 3 together until the last 3 stitches. Purl next 3, 1, 2 and 3. Purl them together again. Pop those off. And then when you've got 3 stitches left, we're going to finish on a knit 1, then a purl 1. So just a purl by itself, a normal one, straight off, and then end on a knit stitch. So that's our second pattern row. And when we turn it over, sorry about the clunkiness of my needles, when we turn it over we can start to see our daisy stitch coming together. And then we're going to knit the next row. So whenever we're facing our pattern, whenever our pattern's facing us, we're going to do a knit row. In case you forget what row you're on, you're thinking, oh, I'm at this stage where I can see my little daisy stitches, I must do a knit row. So it's got a nice plain knit row all the way across. Okay, so we've finished that knit row. You can see your daisy stitch. Now we're going to go back to our first pattern row. So if you remember the first pattern row, we just went straight into knit 1, purl 3 together all the way across. So we start off with a knit stitch, then we go in straight into purl 3 together. So we go into the next 3 stitches, purl those 3 together, but don't drop them off the needle. We're going to do a yarn over needle and we're going to purl those 3 together again. Then we finally pop them off. Okay, and then we knit 1 and do the same thing again. So then we purl 3 together, bring the yarn forward and repeat that pattern all the way to the end. Purl those 3, but don't drop them off. Going to yarn over needle, purl those 3 together again. Because that just creates the stitches that we're losing by purling them together. Back to a knit stitch, then purl 3 together. 1, 2 and 3. Yarn over needle, purl 3 together again. Then a knit 1, purl 3 together. 1, 2 and 3. Let's do a purl stitch, leave them on the right hand needle, yarn over needle and then go through those loops again and purl them again. Okay, and then we end on a knit stitch. Okay, turn that over and we can really see the pattern starting to come together. So then with the pattern facing forward, we know to do a knit row. So I'm just going to knit the next row as normal. If my turner wants to play nicely, making sure to separate out those stitches so we're knitting the correct ones. Okay, so just coming up to the end of this knit row, just knitting every stitch. Then our next row we go back to doing the second pattern row. So if you remember, for the second pattern row we did a knit one, purl one, knit one. So we're going to start off with the knit stitch as normal, little knit stitch, but then we just do that purl by itself, just the one purl stitch. This just helps to alternate the little daisy stitches so they start going horizontal. Then back to a knit stitch, then we go back to our pattern, so we do the knit stitch, then we purl 3 together, the next 3, so 1, 2 and 3. So hopefully you got the idea of the pattern now. Do yarn over needle, knit those 3 together again, finally drop them off the needle, then just do the one knit stitch, purl 3 together, 1, 2, 3, yarn over needle, purl 3 together again, knit 1, purl 3 together, yarn over needle, purl 3 together again. Okay, so when you're up to the last 3 stitches we end on a knit 1, then that single purl stitch, and then a knit stitch. Okay, and there we go, that is the basis of the pattern. So then we would go back to doing a knit row, plain knit row, and then we go back to the first pattern row. And if you forget which pattern row you're on, whether it's a pattern 1 row or a pattern 2 row, you can just count these little flowers. So if you can see that there, the 1, 2, 3 part of the flower, that's 1 flower, so that was our pattern row 1, pattern row 2, then it was back to pattern row 1, and there's a pattern row 2 in there as well, if you can just see it, pattern row 2 that we've just done there. It becomes more noticeable if I just do a knit stitch row, it becomes more noticeable. Let me just quickly do our knit row and then I can show you. Just while I'm doing the knit row, here is a really good example of making sure you're knitting them in the right order. You can see this lower one is in front, and that lower one that's coming further down, that stitch there, that needs to be behind this shorter one. You see that sits much happier after it, and then we knit that one and we end on that slightly longer one. So let's be really careful which ones you knit. So that one's quite obvious because that one's coming out at the front. Then we get that shorter one. Then we get the longer one. Just in case it's a bit confusing. But just finishing up this knit row before my battery runs out. So I can show you much clearer now that we've done 2 sets of pattern rows. So this little flower here, that was pattern row 1, pattern row 2, then it was back to pattern row 1, and we've just done a pattern row 2, so we would know that our next one is a pattern row 1. So there we go, you can just repeat that and create a lovely fabric, daisy fabric, which looks like this in the yellow fabric again, like so. You can see alternating like that. I mean, you could do them just on top of it and end up with sort of a daisy ribbing. Have an experiment, give it a try, see what that looks like. But I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Hope you managed to follow along and learn something new, and also learn some new techniques like Y over N, why do I keep saying that? Y-O-N, yarn over needle, and how to purl 3 together twice, because sometimes you think, oh, purl 3 together, and they end up on the right hand needle. You're like, well, how do I purl them together again? It's because they don't leave that first needle, so they often don't tell you that in patterns. So, but please subscribe if you enjoyed this tutorial, found it useful and want to learn more knitting tricks, and I will see you soon for some more knitting fun. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.